Hey, welcome to Empowered Astrology. I'm Chris. I'm here with Tom Jacobs, and today we're continuing our basics series about the planets. And we're moving on to Uranus and Neptune. So in our first episode on planets, we talked about the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and how those are different than the Sun and the Moon. And then with Jupiter and Saturn, we started to talk about how those are different than the personal planets. And now we're moving on into what are called the transpersonal planets with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So I thought I'd start out by asking Tom to talk a bit about some of the differences that come in here between the planets up through Saturn, and then what happens when we get out past Saturn into Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto.
So one level of difference is the orbits of the outer planets, starting with Uranus around the sun. The years, the duration of their orbits. So where Saturn's 29 and a half years and Uranus is 84 years around the sun. So there's that basic starting place of it's slower, therefore it has a lot more people in a subgroup, Uranus in this sign or that sign, a lot more people. And but then also the energy of archetypally, the energy of Uranus is about shaking up what has been solid in order to create freedom, individuality, to innovate, to invent new things, to ideally create new structures, but break existing structures. So Saturn, the limit, the Lord of Time, the last visible planet visible to the naked eye. Then we have this gap, and then Uranus comes in and it shakes things up. So there's also this archetypal thing where it's not. Some people might think it's anti-Saturn, but it's more like breaking up what's been crystallized that may not work to find new things that are better that do work, or that now in the present moment work better than this thing we created years ago with the Saturn. Yeah, and some people think of the outer planets as generational influences. I like to steer people away from that. Um, whereas with Saturn, two and a half, 2.25 years per sign, something like that, and then Uranus 7 years per sign. That's a huge difference. And then Neptune, what is it, 14 years per sign, and Pluto, it's like 15 to 30 or 14 to 30 or something. Um, I don't. I try to steer people away from thinking they're unimportant because a lot of people in different age groups have them. But I think of them as layers of consciousness that are less personal layers of consciousness, which we can talk more about. But that's a big difference. Is we go kind of deeper into a different kind of archetypal space than Sun, Moon, personal planets, and then even Jupiter, Saturn. The kind of planets in the middle.
I've heard that kind of thing too. That because they're in one sign for so long, that's part of where that whole transpersonal thing
Right.
comes in. Is that they're generational. Everybody around my age has Pluto and Scorpio.
That's right.
But then it's also not something that you want to discount and not read in the chart just because a lot of people have it because it's unique by its house and its aspects and its personal story in your
Yeah.
chart.
And even as a if a counselor, teacher, astrologer can tap into these different layers of consciousness, um, then you can make it real for a person, even if millions of people have the same Pluto sign. I mean, millions of people or a billion people, whatever, something. You can still reach that, and I've just had that experience proven in the Pluto Healing Intensive webinar, where some people, I mean, a lot of people who showed up to that were interested in the outer planet stuff and the depth, but when you find that part of them, it makes sense to them. Yes, this is me. It's not just a group of people that I'm part of.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so it is. I mean, I've had that same
Yeah.
experience where these placements are very deeply relevant in understanding my own makeup, but also there's the transpersonal element where people with those planets tend to go through
Yeah.
things
Right.
together with people of their same generation. The South Node moves over people's
Yeah.
of these planets in the same
Right.
swath for the people of the same ages or whatever
Right.
other transit. So we go through things together, but we also, and collectively it evolves together, but we also have personal
Yeah.
relevance individually about those two. And again, we'll look at house and
Yeah.
aspect
Yeah.
to better understand the personal
And it's
story.
less than day to day with the outer planets.
Hmm.
So that you can think of that as more support for the idea that it's generational and not as important. Or you can just use that to understand it's important, it's just not constantly on your mind, typically. Like the need to create
Mm-hmm.
freedom with Uranus. Do you want to just jump in there and start with the Uranus archetype, or do you have more? Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to frame
Yeah.
up. I guess it's just interesting to add on an astronomical note. I think it's important to the conversation to say that um, for thousands of years, astrology was practiced with the planets up until Saturn. And like you said, Uranus was not or is barely ever visible with the naked eye. So astrology was just only was up to Saturn for
Mm-hmm.
ages, and then all of a sudden Uranus was discovered, and Neptune and Pluto, and this whole new not generation, but like this whole new layer
Mm-hmm.
was added to
Mm-hmm.
astrology that hadn't been there for
Mm-hmm.
millennia. And in some ways, Uranus, the discovery of Uranus, is so representative of that because it is shaking things up and moving beyond what's been solidly formed and
Yes.
crystallized and going out beyond Saturn. And I think that is a key thing to keep in mind when we start to look at the archetype of Uranus is that um, it represents moving beyond something that had been established for
Yeah.
thousands of years, and entering into something new and
Yeah.
progressive. And so with that in mind, like, yeah, can you tell us
Yeah.
about Uranus and what it represents when we start to discover this new
Yeah.
energy?
So, in a person's horoscope, in a person's natal chart, birth chart, it's the need to create change, the need to innovate, the need to individuate, which can be separating oneself from a crowd, finding out what you're really good at, and then re-entering with a kind of innovative idea or different way of doing things. Um, I think about the Industrial Revolution, which follows the discovery of Uranus, and um, Saturn got a lot of that work done in the end, like setting up and physically building new factory structures, different things. But Uranus is where the vision came from for what would be built. So then you add in this sometimes, and this can happen in a person's life as well. So I'm kind of trying to tie these together a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Uranus teaches that change must occur one way or the other. And in your life, in your natal chart, wherever you find it, you'll find impulses to make changes or to bring in new ideas or to sometimes before you get there perpetuate old rhythms until you realize they really don't work. But there's a part of you, you might even say, I've heard other people say, your own personal genius is waiting to innovate, like wants to shake things up. Various social pressures, self confidence, histories of taking risks and finding out sometimes that's not welcome may have us edit ourselves. Or fear of being the one gazelle who separates itself and runs off to the side of the crowd and risks, danger. All those kinds of things are part of the Uranus process, the Uranian archetypal process. So you wherever you find it in your chart, you'll have original ideas, but you might not want to risk doing them. And then you might kind of bite your lip and chew on it for years, and then wonder, you know, and somebody down the street does it, and you're like, "Oh, I knew that was a great idea." um, but the need to free yourself from constriction or restriction or structures in general or structures that don't work. Because sometimes Uranus is just rebellious, and sometimes it's innovative to the point of becoming rebellious. Or revolutionary is a word we haven't used yet either.
Mm-hmm.
We want change. When do we want it? We want it now. That kind of thing. You can be a rebel with a cause or without a cause.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the need to be free. It's also an air, co-rules an air sign, Aquarius, and it's an intellectual thing. Some people will say it's the higher octave of Mercury, meaning Mercury would be the regular normal communication function, perceptive function, where Uranus would be a quicker version of it, a higher, quicker version. I do notice with people's Uranus placements, they have innovative ideas. Again, whether they act on them or not, they have innovative things to say about what it's doing in their charts.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if you have a cause, you might really be willing to fight for it. If you don't have a cause, that might be why you don't fight for change or seek change or initiate change. Therefore,
Hmm.
Uranus also represents becoming and being and staying bored and unfulfilled. When you're creating freedom and you feel free, it's amazing. You feel fully alive. And when you don't know what cause, or you're editing yourself or something, or you're afraid to make changes, you can go a little crazy from being bored and stifled, and you don't feel very alive.
Hmm. And that's where the Uranian energy of sudden change or
Yeah.
shakeups can come in, right? Is if we're not doing our Uranus
Hmm.
actively and um, and keeping things fresh or keeping up with our uniqueness and our healthy
Hmm.
rebellion, but it becomes stifled, then at some point an earthquake happens or a lightning
Yeah.
or something collapses because that it is a necessary part of self. We need to be free, but if we're not using that part
Yeah.
of ourselves, so I guess what I'm saying is it comes out in big ways if we don't if we let it build up, right?
Yeah. I think there's a thing I like to teach about, which is the astrological vacuum, which is an energetic
Mm-hmm.
vacuum. But if you don't use a planet in your chart actively, like you're describing, then you might inadvertently create a vacuum where it's still part of your psyche and your makeup and your energy field and your consciousness, but you're not using it. So, and nature abhors a vacuum. So energies from the world, from other people, will rush in to fill the vacuum. And so if you don't innovate and you won't change, yeah, change will find you, is a way to say it, which is not supposed to make you afraid, because Uranus also represents sudden change that we may experience as traumatic. It could be freeing, it could be shocking, it could be traumatic. It's also, however, chronic stress from not changing,
Mm-hmm.
which can wear us, have a wear and tear kind of thing on our spirits and psyche and hearts as well. So, yeah, if you don't use it, you may end up feeling used by it, is a simplistic way to think of it, where other people's Uranian energies can come in. That could be criticism, being detached, or forcing change, like changing plans quite quickly, or changing your life, or it could be accidents and trauma. It could be different things. And again, I'm not trying to plant seeds of fear, but Uranus's teaching for all of us is change is inevitable. Will you innovate when you need to? Will you honor the ways that you are unique and do something about it?
So that word uniqueness, so I'm wanting to like kind of get a little deeper into what Uranus
Hmm.
wants because it wants change and it wants freedom and it might rebel and it might shake things up, um, but it's not randomly, right? It's not to no end. It's I think if I'm right here, let me know that there's a conversation here about healthy uniqueness and
Yeah,
individuality. Like what what kind of change does Uranus want, and why does it want it if not
yeah,
randomly,
yeah.
right?
Again, if you have a cause, you might understand how to make the changes for the right reasons at the right times. You might.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning you have a goal, a vision, a cause, a destination in mind, a vision, but you realize how the way things are set up around you currently, a couple things maybe are in the way or just not going to work. But there's a way of finding out about our own Uranus energy, which is a different way, which is let's say that somebody shows up to a new job and is being given a tour of the facility, and the tour person says, "Oh, the most important thing is that you're here right at 9. The most important." And you're like, "Sure." Everybody you meet emphasizes that, right? So let's say after a 2 hour tour of this facility and your job description, whatever, you've heard that from 9 people, even people like whispering, like, just make sure you're always here at 9. Don't. What if you then realize, I hate that? You never cared before, but the existence of a rule and pressure might make part of
Hmm.
you say, oh, that's not for me. So that's another way it wakes up. So whether you have a cause or you don't have a cause, you have a goal, you don't have a goal, it gets woken up in different ways. Everybody's
Hmm.
saying, here's the rule, and you realize, whew, I cannot follow that rule. I cannot, and you realize it. That's another way that it happens. Maybe you don't have a goal you understand, or a goal you've articulated, or whatever. But you might realize the way Saturn structural things in the environment, or rules is what I'm getting at, they may define a space you don't feel you can fit in. And it can be urgent and dramatic, the need to free yourself.
Hmm.
It's not always clever and methodical and well thought out. Sometimes it's, what is with this 9 o'clock thing? I know I can't do that. And then realizing I got to find a different way to do something, to do stuff.
And in those kind of cases where we have like, it's not a bad thing per se.
Right.
It's like but there's still this impulse to, I just don't want to conform.
Mm-hmm.
I just, because the rule is there, part of me feels like I
Yes.
need to rebel or do something
That's right.
differently. It's like reverse psychology or
Well, yeah.
adolescence or.
And that's how the
Hmm.
rebellion can sometimes be not so helpful. But sometimes it
Hmm.
is, maybe at this place, maybe 65% of the employed population, the employees, maybe in the long run, maybe this person is a Promethean fire stealer. Maybe this person joins the joins the company, and then 4 or 5 years in makes a suggestion in an anonymous Dropbox, or Dropbox, the suggestion box in the cafeteria, if they still have those, or in the break room, and it's something like, what if you did staggered shifts and people could choose? Maybe that person
Hmm.
can bring change, suggest a better way given the reality of the employee psychology or whatever. And
Hmm.
anyway, so we don't know. What I want to emphasize is everybody has a Uranus. Everybody
Hmm.
has a way of seeing things in an innovative way if they let themselves.
Hmm.
And Uranus can be anywhere in the chart with any number of aspects, retrograde or direct or whatever. But everyone's got a way of seeing things from an original viewpoint, and they can bring this with them. They can bring this.
So everybody's got this part of them that wants to be an innovator, that is progressive and not wanting to be bound
Yeah,
by what's already come before, and shake things up, and then that energy. So we can live that out in healthy ways
totally.
where we are helping to reform and
Yes,
progress existing structures and evolve things, or we can, if we don't feel like we have a way to create that freedom and innovation, then it can build up and we can end up rebelling against things we don't actually need to rebel
exactly.
against. Hmm.
Exactly. Really good point. Because am I rebelling because I have a vision of a better way to do something, or am I rebelling because you keep telling me there are rules and I just decided I really don't like it? Either way, Uranus is real. you know, yeah, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
person's need to behave in a certain way. Sometimes it is just, please stop telling me what to do. I need to find my own rhythm. And you might find people
Hmm.
who would say, I am not progressive. Like, hear you say that and say, well, I am not a forward thinking person. They might insist upon that, but they still have their own way of envisioning and attempting to introduce change to make things better. They still have that, though they may not think of themselves as progressive or change oriented, but they might be efficiency oriented, or they might be just noticing that seems to be illogical, right? The air quality, the intellectual quality of Uranus. Everybody's got this part of them, whether it's expressed or not, whether it's verbalized or not. Yeah.
I'm getting a picture. It's like because we're Uranus is right the first like trans Saturn planet, and so it's like Saturn builds tradition and settles things in place and like establishes things, and then Uranus is about the bringing forward or reworking, evolving, or sometimes collapsing and completely
Right.
reformatting of like depends, but in some way it's moving beyond what Saturn has established, and it can be big. The 60s were in American history were informed by a very strong Uranus transit, right? And they can look like that, like
Yes.
revolutionary free love energy, but it can also look like, and I think what you're pointing at is there's people who might not feel like they have this Uranus the way that we're
Hmm.
painting it, but maybe they have like a suburban home or something, and they just realize there's a better way to organize the
Yeah.
garage,
Yeah. Or care for this part of the house or whatever. Everybody's got they see a better way to do something. Yeah.
Some system
That's
has
right.
built up, and they can bring change to it that makes
That's
it
right. That's
better.
right. And the other thing about this is the individuality aspect we mentioned a little bit earlier, individuation. And I would say finding out
Hmm.
what you're passionate about, finding out what you're good at is part of that. But the other part of Uranus in a person's, makeup is the need to be alone, which may not be fully
Hmm.
understood. And sometimes it comes from sometimes you'll find a person with a very strong Uranus signature, Uranus energy, and that person will be very critical of others. It's kind of a stereotype, but it's an archetype. Other people aren't quick enough. They don't understand this. They don't know how to do this. What's wrong with them? It's kind of impatience because Uranus typically grasps things ahead of other people when a strong Uranus is present. Doesn't have to be judgmental of others, but it can if you feel like you're being held back. So part of this
Hmm.
is also being alone so you can clear the noise of the world, the chatter, away so that you can think straight. And that's where the innovative ideas often come from.
Hmm.
So sometimes you'll find somebody who's very critical of people or society or, bah humbug or whatever. What they really need is like enough time alone to just think their own thoughts because the Uranian impulse is trying to get them to bring that kind of creativity through. But you can't do it if you have songs or the catchphrases from sitcoms stuck in your head. Or if you never have a quiet moment, you don't find your inner genius. So sometimes Uranian frustration with situations and people and the critical nature, it can be harsh and, really cruel tongued. It can be. Um, but anyway, sometimes it's I just need to be alone and not answer the phone and not check it, not have all these distractions so that I can just clear the chatter out of my head. Yeah,
And that rebellion can be about making
that's
space
right.
for that.
Exactly. So sometimes it's not, you know, I hate everybody. Sometimes it's like I perceive I hate everybody because I can't think straight because of everybody's catchphrases, an obsession with sports. I need to be quiet and stop listening. Like I need to sit and be quiet.
And that'll be different by house and
Yeah,
sign and
totally.
aspect, the ways that people, I guess, the ways that people bring innovation, the the area of life in which they need
That's
space
right.
to feel their unique
That's right.
genius, um, and whatever else Uranus represents. It'll be a particular area of life that this energy
That's
comes
right.
out.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so as we build into the conversations about signs and houses and signs and aspects and stuff, we can start to
Mhm.
understand that story
Yeah.
more
Yeah, for
deeply.
sure.
Because it won't be ubiquitous, right? It won't be in every area of life a person feels a need to
That's right.
rebel or create freedom or have space, but in some area of life there'll be a need for this Uranian
Yeah,
energy.
definitely. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then by transit, and we'll talk about that in a second, it'll move around and activate other areas of life too. But to the chart holder, to the individual with the
Mhm.
birth chart, there'll be a set natal imprint of where this
Yeah,
energy
definitely,
lives.
definitely. And I have one more thing about the natal archetype and living with it.
Hmm.
And it is that it is forward looking, futuristic,
Hmm.
sci-fi, dystopian, utopian. Um, and but it has a vision of the future, right? And it's very common for other people to not understand yet. I mentioned the frustration if other people don't grok something as quickly as you do, you might be frustrated and feel like they're dragging you down. But part of that is a very real thing, which can happen when one claims enough time alone to think straight. But the person perceives a solution that others can't see the value of yet. And the last couple of years, the last year, I've used this example of, let's say, 12 years ago, somebody in Flint, Michigan, who has an office job, a desk job with the water department or whatever, is looking over some numbers and says, "Boss, we have a problem." Seeing a problem before other people see it. Maybe even having a
Mm.
solution before other people understand there's a problem. So one of the other things about living with Uranus, right, and maybe that person articulates a solution and is told, that will be so much money, we can't possibly do that. And even the Uranus person may see clearly, don't you understand this is the health of people and children? Right? Because that there's a logic in there. And the other people might say, gosh, our budget, I don't know if we can. Anyway, so there's a sense of seeing solutions before other people know there's a problem. So not every Uranian idea is good, but some of them the person may grasp them. So there can be a frustration with other people or a loneliness that comes from Uranus also.
Mm.
And depending on how active it is in that person's makeup and behavior, but it's a very real thing where a Uranian person, regarding his or her placement, might just be very frustrated that nobody else gets it, and that can make people lonely and bitter. It can make people self-righteous with a chip on their shoulder. It can be lots of different responses, obviously, but that's a very real part of it too. Sometimes.
There was one other thing I wanted to
Yeah.
pull a little bit more at, and we may have danced all around
Mm.
it, but I don't know if we've really focused in on the word like individuation and like the individual quality around
Mm-hmm.
Uranus yet. And there can be a trope or a teaching, an archetype around Uranus where it can be associated with like tattoos or body modification, or the person who
Mm-hmm.
wears like leopard print everything, or with the
Yeah.
mohawk,
Yeah.
right? Or all the different kind of like the being weird for the sake of being
Right.
weird, or being different, or being individual, and that shows up out of Uranus
Mm-hmm.
too for some reason. Where does that come from, and what is this quality of individualization with Uranus
Yeah.
about?
Whether it's politics or body modification, or I think it comes, or in art, or in belief structures, belief systems, there's a need to set oneself apart, to have the freedom to be unique, to express uniqueness. So you can think about, I just have the thing in my head about tattoos on one's face. It's a statement. And it's like you're making sure people see that you're making a statement. I don't judge it either way. I don't have like some terrible thing I'm going to say about it. But that sense of like a mohawk may come and go. My anarchist views may come and go. My resentment for this thing or that thing, or criticism of this or that may come and go. But there's the need to be different, sometimes to embody difference, but like to sometimes say, I'm not part of your messed up system.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not party to your expletiving crummy logic and how you build the world and treat each other and yourself. I think there's sometimes that sense of, I can't endorse what you're doing that is completely stupid and wasteful. because there's a
Mm-hmm.
different value system. There's a different vision the person may have, the Uranian person may have. It can be expressed in a billion ways. It's not always like in the anarchist, like punk aesthetic is another way to think of that rebellious thing. And if you just gather together a bunch of people who identify as that, some of them will have long, cogent, passionate speeches about where they stand and what they believe in, what they stand for, and some of them will just be like, I don't know, I just looked around and it was a bunch of crap and I decided to rebel. Like some of them will not have cogent, passionate positions, and some of them definitely will. So some are just again, rebel with a cause, rebel without a cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking as you're saying that, it's like there's not a consciousness judgment
Yeah.
on that of good, bad, right, wrong. Like one can have a really cool mohawk and also be out there like running for Congress or something and trying to
Yeah.
make progressive
Yeah.
change, or one can just be like disempowered and trying to make space somehow,
Mm-hmm.
and all these gradients
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
between. So the fact that someone is wanting to individuate and show up uniquely doesn't mean that they're not also using that same progressive energy in other ways
Yeah.
too. And it's valid to want to make those kinds of statements and have those forms of
Mm-hmm.
expression. But I'd say maybe looking at what that Uranus really wants, and like also being part of that change that one wants, or
Yeah.
feeling like one has a way to help bring the world
Right.
forwards and isn't just in
That's right.
rebellion, would be the healthiest way to use a Uranus.
Definitely.
But it's totally cool to be unique
Mm-hmm.
and have your own like way of strolling
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think about the story of I think about the Greek mythology of Prometheus, and Richard Tarnas is
Mm-hmm.
called Uranus. Maybe it should be called Prometheus, and has kind of tied that together in his work. And so we sometimes have a cause and don't have a cause when we rebel. We think about Prometheus as this hapless victim of Zeus's wrath after Prometheus steals fire from Zeus for humanity. Prometheus is a champion of humanity and wants to see humanity grow. So he tricks Zeus in a way that humiliates Zeus. And so what we hear is, oh, he's chained to a rock. Big Bird is eating, not Big Bird, the Big Bird, but a large bird. Some people say vulture, some people say eagle, eating his liver out, but it grows back overnight. And it's this perennial, endless punishment. And Chiron switches places, convinces Zeus to release Prometheus, blah, 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 so Chiron can give up his immortality and die from his wound, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I feel in my gut as a Promethean person, Prometheus knew exactly what he was doing. He was going to anger Zeus, but the cost of humanity's evolution was worth it. So he had a cause. And what he did was he created two sacrifices for Zeus, two bulls, essentially. And one was charred and looked terrible on the outside, but was beautiful and amazing on the inside. He basically switched the externals. So the other one looked awesome on the outside and was horrible and charred on the inside. And he offered both to Zeus. Pick whichever. I'm here to serve you, Zeus. Whatever. I want you to be happy. And while Zeus was going, this one looks terrible, but that one looks amazing. When Zeus was doing that, and then he picked the one that looked great and it was ugly inside. Prometheus stole the fire and was like, haha, I got this. Anyway, so he knew. He knew there was a cost to that innovation. That's actually a chapter in Living Myth 2, Sacred Psychology. It's called The Cost of Innovation, part of the subtitle. And he knew. And so I think that we as Uranian, when we live our Uranian stories, we don't have to create damage or destruction. We don't have to rebel without a cause. But if we have a cause, or if we find out we have a goal or a cause, we have to honor that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
lots more there, but I feel like I'm feeling the energy
Good.
to
The
start
transit.
shepherding it towards
What,
Neptune. But so
Uranus in
let's,
transit for a
but
minute.
let's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly, yeah, towards Neptune, but not quite all the way
Okay.
there yet. And let's round out by looking at how Uranus works in
Mm-hmm.
transit differently than we've been talking about how it is in one's individual
Yep.
makeup, and then how does it change when it's Uranus transiting the chart?
So again, it takes about 84 years for its orbit. So around 84, you'll have a return. But of course, between that, you have Uranus making different aspects with every planet in your chart around that over those decades. It's as a teacher, it's asking you questions, and I steal this whole idea of like it asks questions from Steve Forrest, my teacher, and it says, "Are you free?" regarding your Mars or your Pluto or whatever it is, and the answer is Uranus goes, "Are you free?" Hint, hint, you're not free. Like before you even can say, "I think I'm free" or "I'm trying," Uranus goes, "No, you're not." So Uranus challenges and invites you and maybe pushes you into a corner to change something in your life. Whether it never worked or it used to work, but now it's time to change it, upgrade it, up your game, do something new, approach it in a new way, radically reinvent something. So it says you're not free, free yourself regarding whatever part of the chart it's touching and the house it's in your chart. Um, a lot of people will feel, oh, suddenly something doesn't work. I don't know, it's stale in here. Let's open a window and figure this out. And some people will say, well, the structures of my life are such that and then the pressure builds. And it can be like
Mm,
water behind a dam, where at the end it's just a little water that made the dam break, but you knew for years it was going to happen. So Uranian
mm-hmm.
transits are these, and that can happen personally as well with the natal chart setup if you ignore the need to change. But in transit, it's very obvious because life is trying to get you to change. Life may even kind of like grab you by the lapels and say, Chris, wake up! You don't like this thing in your life. And then you might say, well, but I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years, right? It could be
Mm.
anything.
The distinction there is probably being that, like, with your personal Uranus, there's that always building up sense of I want to be free, I want to be
Mm-hmm.
unique, I want to bring progressive value
Mm-hmm.
to the world, and but if that water's building up behind a dam, and all of a sudden Mars comes around and activates your Uranus, then the dam might
Right.
break from your
Right.
Uranus, whereas the transiting Uranus goes around the whole chart and asks, is there water building up here?
Mm-hmm.
And is there water building up here? And
Mm-hmm.
are you free here? And are you free here?
Yeah.
And challenges things in that
Exactly.
way.
Step by step, all of the planets in turn. So make all those aspects and ask that question over and over again. Are you free? You're not
Mm.
free. Are you free? Wake up. You're not free. I mean, over and but gradually, right, for months and years at a time. But yeah, all the way around the wheel with that impulse to get you to free yourself from what has constricted or confined you, or what makes you feel or be hemmed in or fenced in.
That's a really interesting conversation. At some point, I think to look at how each planet talks to each other planet might be cool.
Yeah.
But what Uranus is doing there is it's trying to upgrade and free every part
hmm
of the self.
And another way to say it is, what in your life has become stale and makes you feel half dead?
Mm. hmm And so, it often gets billed in transit as this planet of sudden change and shakeups, and
hmm
it rules earthquakes and lightning strikes, like we've
Yeah.
talked about. Um, I think you're saying that if we keep an eye on these energies, there's a way for it not to have to appear so drastically. But
hmm
is that accurate, or will there still sometimes be that quality of shock and like the Tower
mm
card in
Yeah.
tarot around it? I guess maybe I'm getting my own answer here, that it has to do with whether or not we were aware of the thing that was building
Yeah,
up or not.
mostly. And sometimes we're just not aware and there's no fault of our own. We're just living our lives. And then something comes to us and says, look, I'm disrupting your life. And you're like, what? Shock and awe. And so sometimes, I mean, being aware is important, but sometimes things will surprise you. That's just part of the message with Uranus. But
Hmm
to be open to change and aware that change is inevitable is a huge benefit, or a huge you get a leg up on the situations if you're aware. Like if something comes to you and says, "Oh, your life is changing," you can freak out and run around and tear your hair out, or you can understand and adapt and be willing to change.
Yeah. Yeah. We can get
Yeah,
overstimulated and
yeah,
resist, or we can listen to the helpful and like teacher who's trying to help us change and upgrade and shake something up. Um, and so the probably when that starts to happen, when that Uranian force comes in, is to work with the change or work with the need to become free will be a more empowered, smoother time than to resist it or try to stay with what's
right,
not working.
right, right.
Okay, well, cool. That's Uranus, and part of Uranus at least. Um, let's talk some Neptune and start to wrap our heads around that archetype. Um, what would be the entry point you'd give us to start to understand Neptune in our
Neptune in the
charts?
chart. So it's a part of the psyche, part of you that is impelled or impulsed towards certain kinds of seeking something. And what Neptune wants to do inside you as part of you is to surrender and flow and go with the flow, to merge with something. If we presume, if one were to presume that every human life is a spiritual path, maybe we could say that everyone needs a sense of spiritual meaningfulness. That's one corner of it. I need to know that I'm part of something bigger, is part of the surrender and flow. I need to know that there's a reason for my life, because logically I understand how small I am. And I'm aware of the cosmos. I'm aware of the canopy of all the stars. I'm aware of the impossible beauty of symphonies and art and creativity of all kinds. And it's bigger than me. It's like these perfect forms that. So we get into this need to personally find ourselves part of something bigger. And again, sometimes it's spirituality, sometimes it's creativity, sometimes it's consciousness exploration outside of spirituality or religion, and but sometimes it's within religion. It's the need, and so sometimes I'll think of it as the part of you that is not. It does not have a well-defined ego structure, but it's always trying to pull you to connect with something bigger than you and go with the flow. I guess that's one way to introduce it. Is that too dense? Is that weird?
No,
Okay.
no, it's good. It's a good like frame up, and so and I know I've talked to you about this planet too before, and that I think so. It's the need in us to connect to something
Yes,
bigger than
and to
us.
know that we belong, we're welcome. There's a reason we're here.
And that's spirituality in like that, and that can be to the collective,
Yeah.
to
Yes.
nature and the
Thank you,
planet,
nature. Yep.
to our own higher
Mm-hmm.
self, and to source or spirit or a sense of
Yep.
spirituality. There's different layers to the things that are bigger
Mm-hmm.
than us, but Neptune's about feeling connected to
Yeah.
all of
Or any
them.
of them. Yeah. Any or all. Yeah. I mean, it includes all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some people, like
Mm-hmm.
I teach, basically how to teach people how to communicate with their spirit guides, and then those people who do well with that, they can learn mediumship from me, which is working with the spirits of dead people, and kind of understanding that whole dimension. And that's a Neptune thing, because how do we understand what we don't linearly understand? How do we understand what our brains can't grok? And how do we work in multi-dimensional realms? So that's another Neptune part. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like transformation of consciousness, but multi-dimensional consciousness is part of it. Like when you hear Like when I hear Sibelius' Fifth Symphony, and like everything in my body goes to mush and pudding and love and goo, I go crazy, and it's like I feel it's undeniable that that there's something bigger than the human. Because I'm somehow whatever he's bringing through, just energetically, consciousness wise, alters me. So another way of looking at Neptune within a person is seeking altered states to feel part of a greater whole or connected to God or whatever, goddess, God, whatever. I just wanted to insert that little idea of altered states in there too.
Hmm.
For me, it's music and
Yeah.
other things, but certain composers just, oh my God, and I can't ever go back, and I don't know what to do because I'm like, I feel like I just saw part of the heart of God or something. It's like, and then you're trying to find these words, and people are like, why are you so poetical? And you're like, yeah, that's it, the poetry of my spirit. And then you're like, and that's Neptune as well, lofty,
Mhm.
idealistic. Yeah.
Would it be fair to say it's getting beyond the experience of the
Yes.
ego or of the linear mind or the individual personality
Yes.
self to experience, and that's where it hits all these marks of um, art and
That's right.
nature and the
That's
divine,
right.
but also video gaming and
Mm-hmm.
movies and music and stuff too, because it's like it's anything that gets us out of
That's right.
us and into an experience
Okay.
beyond
And
ourselves.
therefore, you also have substances of any kind. Yes.
Hmm.
Exactly. So therefore, Neptune is part of us that may try to escape. We may seek something beautiful or escape something horrible.
Hmm.
Thinking about addictions and substances, and that's also part of our personal Neptunian experience. It can be addictions to anything,
Hmm.
escapist things that. The way I like to say it is escapist behaviors that may have us lean toward or get into addictive patterns. But escapist things, addictive things, it's all the same. I may try to escape pain. Drinking helps me forget, and then I realize I have an issue, or maybe I don't, but everyone says I do. Whatever it is, Neptune's part of that story too.
It's interesting because there's a lot of nuance to this
Hmm.
because there's addiction and escapism, but there's also like
That's right.
transcendence and getting a look up above the labyrinth or
That's
something,
right.
or um, and that's where you can have somebody who's got so much unprocessed pain that they lose themselves
Hmm.
in. I mean, it could be 8 hours a day of binging Netflix or overdosing on
Hmm.
drugs, but then you can also have somebody who's you know having a lot of stuff that they're working with, and they take some plant medicine and
Hmm.
it's a healing transformation, or they just watch a movie and they get a little space
Yep.
from it, and then the next
Yeah,
and they come out the other side of it and they're able to take a breath and
that's
start
right.
working on the energy in a new
That's right.
way.
So I like to conserve or refrain from judging because for one person, this behavior may be a very unhealthy thing in this current groove of that person's life, but in another person, it may not be. Some people, chase ayahuasca ceremonies because they don't just want to be here. They don't want to be just a person here, limited, right? And for some people, it's a periodic thing. I mean, those people are in the minority, but I've heard from them like they're basically looking for the next opportunity all the time, almost obsessively, like fixated on how that's where meaning is. But some people do that with football season. Other people do that with being a foodie and waiting for that new restaurant
Mm-hmm.
to open up because it's so amazing and the staff and the whatever and the owner. And for other people, that's a spiritual community or a religious doctrine where they rely on it or something. So anyway, I try to refrain from judging any of it and just kind of understand where a person is and if they're healthy and how they relate to it, and if it's unhealthy, we can work on it and we can shift it. But part of us seeking altered states of consciousness or alternate realities or whatever. It's not always a problem.
Hmm.
You've heard me say stuff like this before. It's like, if somebody were to ask me, we talk about Neptune or whatever, but if somebody were to ask me, am I doing this thing too much? And it's like we don't have an answer for that. Let's talk about, does it feel healthy or whatever? You know, my thing
Yeah.
with Netflix is like that because I spend all my time listening to people's problems. So what's the last thing I want to do otherwise? So I will watch something that has nothing to do with people counseling each other or grieving or supporting each other with a kind word and crying because it's all over my work. You know what I mean? So it's like I want to escape that. So I would like, something completely fantastical, right? And sometimes I watch a lot, but I just keep an eye on it. I just keep an eye on it and try to be honest about, is it too much? Is it unhealthy?
And we wouldn't want to shut down this impulse
That's
within the
right.
self to connect to things beyond itself, but also don't want to get
That's right.
lost in, and not to judge it, but just like if we ask the question of like what is a healthy integration of the chart and of this part of the
Mm-hmm.
energetic being look
Mm-hmm.
like, then it is about getting beyond ourselves, but it's also not about
That's right.
escaping ourselves. It's about integrating with those experiences that we
That's right.
get of getting beyond the
That's right.
ego, but also bringing it back into our lives
Yeah.
as well.
So finding the beauty, finding the inspiration, finding the big heart, divine love, whatever people might say, like that's what the Sibelius does for me, um, and finding that, but also staying so grounded so we don't float away or wish we weren't here, wish we didn't have to be here.
Meditating so that we can come and engage more clearly and groundedly and inspiredly with our
That's
lives,
right.
but not meditating to get away
That's
from our
right. That's right.
lives.
And yeah, so that's Neptune within a person. It
Hmm.
needs some higher connection or connection with bigger than itself. I mean, that's actually why stuff like sports is actually really sports as a category. Sport is actually really great for this because it also serves the root chakra, which is one place in the energy field where Neptune in my world lives. Um, that sense of community connection and we're all like in this together kind of thing on the root. But there's a thing about how there's a schedule and your favorite team's going to play. Maybe you go live, maybe you watch it, whatever, listen to it, watch it later, whatever, or watch it live. But that sense of like the sense of connectedness and this, it's an altered way of experiencing time when you're really into it. And like right now, the World Cup is happening. I guess this will probably be released after the World Cup wraps up. But anyway, there's a sense of like getting lost in connection. So it actually can be a really good thing, and it's periodic
Hmm.
because I don't know. I'm assuming there aren't sports that have seasons that run the full year. I'm assuming there aren't, but that sense of it comes and goes. But if you are really into Fortnite, it maybe doesn't go right. So we look at
Uh-huh.
structures and how we relate to them, engage our own engagement, engage our health, and stuff like that.
Hmm. And so I think this brings us to asking about, to looking at like the differences between different Neptunes, because they're going to be in different
Mm-hmm.
signs and in different
Mm-hmm.
houses and in different aspects, and so that'll point to different ways of connecting to
Yeah.
something bigger. So there might be the person who um, I don't know, maybe it's they really get this sense of expansion and clearing out and alignment from time in nature, but somebody else might have it over here and get that from going to the gym
Right.
and like working out. And then this person over here listens to symphonies.
Mm-hmm.
This person over here studies spiritual texts
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And realizing that there's not just one way
That's right.
to to connect like
It's a really good
this.
point because I suppose I've become a meditation teacher of a sort, but I don't like formal meditation. And I don't and I have a variety of tools that are all based on a template, which people can explore through my site. And it's a template I learned from my channeling teacher years ago. Um, and then the Ascended Master channel modifies it somewhat, but the basic template is the same. But the best meditation for me, there were, I would say, two things. One is bicycle riding. You just think about your, you're aware of what's in front of you. You're steering the bike, but your legs, your feet, your legs, just doing the same thing over and over again. The terrain changes, the rhythm changes, but that for me is the best meditation. And the second best was when I worked as a cook in a hotel kitchen years ago, right after college. And before on Saturday, prepping for Sunday brunch, they would give me like you know, I don't know, 300 pounds of potatoes to peel by hand, or how many giant bags of yellow onions to peel and trim and cut up, or how many. My favorite was the mushrooms, boxes and trays and trays and trays of mushrooms, because that I could do that and do the same thing over and over again, and that's the best meditation for me. Is not trying to get my mind to stop. It will not. So the thing you're saying about the Neptune thing, I like to tie that together with if you want to meditate. Again, what does spirituality look like? What does creativity look like? What should meditation look like? I want to say there should be no assumption, because we're looking for how can you surrender, go with the flow, get out of your own way, get your mind out of your own way. So when I'm doing something repetitive like with the mushrooms, what we'll do with the vegetables and mushrooms, or biking, it takes me out of that because there's a rhythm, there's something happening. So anyway, I just want to encourage people hearing this and saying, Neptune, I thought that was about meditation and spirituality. Yes, but how you connect will be different. And like you say, the gym, nature, for some people, nature including water. For some people, it's like the green field with the sunlight. It could be any different form of it, whatever. I just really want to leave. I don't want anyone to have these rigid expectations of what their Neptune behaviors should be like.
And validating, it could be rock climbing, slacklining, going, like window washing, like
cleaning the house,
whatever.
Vacuuming,
traveling,
anything. Yeah.
And I'm having some aha moments just listening to you about like, it's like realizing that I get that at work, just letting the flow of work happen, clears my mind as much as a mind is going to clear when it's, conjunct Neptune.
Well, exactly.
Like both of us
well, let me just say one other thing. The third thing that was
Sure.
the best for meditation wise is data entry. And I had a job years ago where I was going to leave the job, but I had like 3 weeks left, and they shifted me over to do data entry because I don't know, my heart wasn't in anything anymore, and so they were like, let's see if you can just do this for a while. And they gave me these stacks and stacks and stacks of records where I had to correct certain fields in every record. And I got into this groove. I put fish on my earbuds, and just did it. And they were checking for mistakes, and it was like there are almost no mistakes in these like 30,000 records or whatever it was that I updated, because Mercury Neptune just got into groove with it, and it was like music. But anyway, so yeah, sorry, I just wanted to insert that because I remember that I had forgotten all about that.
No, you're good. It's good lived examples. So, I want to ask, this part of our charts is about how we connect to something bigger than ourselves and all the other nuances of that we've been discussing. But is that the only way that we can connect to something bigger than ourselves is what's represented by our Neptune?
Well, this is where, and we're not going to get too far into this now, but I'll mention this, where we have overlap within an archetype, meaning Neptune is the planet. It's related to Pisces. They're not the same. And related to the 12th house, they're not the same. Signs and houses and planets are not the same. Neptune is the part of you that seeks this connection. Pisces is a method. A planet in Pisces seeks to surrender. And then in the 12th house, parts of life in which surrender is the deal. So there are,
and then transiting Neptune to...
Yeah, but I just want to say just that natal thing, there are other ways this archetype expresses in various ways. But yeah, your Neptune placement or what's in the 12th, like I have planets in the 12th, plus the Neptune placement. I don't have anything in Pisces, but anyway, there are different avenues into this frequency, so to speak.
There's different parts of the chart that can kind of speak to this. Right. Just like, if you look for sensitivity in the birth chart, there's going to be different potential markers for that point to point in different ways to a general region.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think what I'm getting at there, though, is that like if somebody has a Neptune that's like really different than your Neptune, and then like the way that they connect might not work for the way that you connect, and understanding that like I guess it is an interesting question of like can we connect in any way, or are there particular ways that will work for us?
I think it depends on the overall chart signatures, plural. Well, I think it can really depend. And then also within relationships, how other people affect us is another variable too. And astrocartography, sometimes where we are on the planet can affect us in different ways too. So I think there are different ways. But
okay, lots and lots of layers. But our natal placement is our primary, most natural way for us to find that sense of connection.
Right. Now, let's say that the be-all, end-all for you is this composer named Bruckner. Let's just make something up totally random, because I said Sibelius earlier for me. Let's say that you're like, whoa, this Bruckner, oh my gosh, listen to this with me. It transports me. Well, let's say I listen to it with you, and you're like in your Neptunian space, and your eyes are all like glazed over, and you're blissed out. Well, let's say that I really enjoy it, but I'm not blissed out. And then we trade, and you listen to Sibelius' Fifth Symphony with me, same thing. You're like, well, gosh, that gentleman certainly knew how to compose beautiful music. And I'm like, oh my God, you know how to see God's face? So we even have like grades of similarity and overlap, but not quite the same.
Different experiences, different charts.
Years ago, with an ex-girlfriend, I was in Houston, and we went to the Rothko Chapel, which is an octagon that's a place of peace. It's a quiet space for contemplation, whatever. And we're both. She was an art history major, and we're both into modern art and whatever. And it was like this, it's like one of the touristy things for people like us. So we went there, and we walked in, and we were there for a while, and you don't talk. We came out later, and I had this amazing experience where, and she said, "What a disappointment! I can't believe you loved that." She wasn't being a jerk. She was just saying, that fell flat. And I was like, what's happening? I was like almost a disorganized, dysregulated person, because it was so beautiful to me. And it's the same thing. It's all Neptune, but certain things appeal to certain people.
I think that's what I wanted to unwind a little there, was because I know you've also said, and let's add this in here, that Neptune is about what's capital T true.
Yes,
for
what
us,
resonates,
right?
what
what's
feels
capital
true.
T
Yes,
true.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
And so in that, it's kind of a Neptunian conversation here, but different people, but where your Neptune is will show you what's true for you. Is that a fair way to think of it?
Yeah, and what kinds of behaviors may help you find the inner resonance where certain things feel true and certain things don't? So I'd say an inner alignment with a higher truth.
And it's not, and to not complicate this too much, because there is, and this is where, transiting Neptune will help point us to the big capital T, all-encompassing divine truth, but what are the true ways for us to connect to truth might be different than other people's true ways to connect to truth. So Neptune can show us what's true for us amongst the set of truths. Yep. It's like one of those, the infinity that holds many infinities kinds of things.
Yeah. So when I teach people in these courses called the Higher Self Protocol, Well, I teach them where I'm channeling for them. I'm doing energy work. It's like it's this whole Neptunian thing of altered states and higher dimensions or whatever. But I don't know what's true for them. But I know there's a protocol I can teach them to help them be less attached to 3D stuff and their old emotions and judgments so that they can vibrate in ways that spirit guides and dead people and angels and ascended masters can find them, can communicate. So I don't know what's true for this person. I don't know what faculty or skill, intuitive skill, is right for this person. I don't know if, Fred, he can only get intuitive info if he picks up an object that somebody touched it, like psychometry. I don't know if this other person can only get info from angels in her dreams. I don't know how her multidimensional self works. But I have a protocol which helps people clear the garbage so they can find out what they do, what they do well. And so it's unique to each person, but that sense of a higher truth or a greater love or a divine love we can think of as more elevated than human idea of love, which can include like, well, that lady ghosted me, or I judge this person so I don't, a divine love, a higher truth, a higher love. It is very Neptunian. Anyway, I'll be brief, but there are ways to clear the way to find what resonates as, yes, this is correct for me from a higher vantage point. I even just ask people, please decide you're willing to find out what's in your highest good, even if your personality does not like the answer. Because there's and Neptune is part of that. Neptune is. Can we go into transits, or do you have more on the natal?
Yeah,
Okay,
one
good.
more piece, and that what I'm getting there is just
Yeah,
to
I want
tie
to
it
tie it to.
together
But yeah,
is
go
that
ahead.
like
Yeah.
this is the part of self that yeah, that get again, walking it back, getting out of the linear rational
Mm-hmm.
mind, getting connected to guidance from our higher self, a sense
That's
of
right.
belonging and connectedness with our higher self, and like what gets us there so that we can be living in the ways that are right and aligned and
Yeah,
inspired
what's
for
correct
us.
for you? What inspires you is a good part of it. Yeah. Thank you for that word. Yep.
And I wanted to just before we
Yeah.
touch on transits to look at the so w- this is what our Neptune wants and what a healthy Neptune wants. What happens if we aren't doing our Neptune, or if our Neptune is in some way disrupted
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
challenged because of other factors in
Yeah.
the chart? What does a Neptune look like when it's not getting to connect in this way?
The person can be overwhelmed by things that are bigger than they are. The person can also have received conditioning or models from loved ones and community, like, I don't know, stereotypes about how all Irish people are drinkers. I dated a girl once a woman who, from an Irish background, and she just carried this assumption that all of them were going to have alcohol problems. And, and it's like, so we can have models and examples that limit our imagination, right? Some, or show us there's a higher truth that's actually painful, but it's not a higher truth. It's just an idea or belief. What does it look like? The overwhelm idea, because your Neptune faculty within you, this part of your psyche, seeks to connect to something bigger to feel part of something bigger and therefore feel welcome and meaningful, right? Well, one thing that can happen is that part of us opens and is overwhelmed by what it finds. So an unhappy or unhealthy or dysregulated Neptune can be shut down to possibilities, altered states, multidimensional stuff, angels, guidance, whatever, can be shut down to the magic of chanting or the beauty of that waterfall, like to be shut down, to be not interested, is one way it can kind of veer into unhappy, unhealthy territory. Or the escapist thing is the other thing. Shutdown or escapism. I guess a third route can be, how do you say this? I want to say being seduced, but I mean getting kind of, how do you say this? Like wool pulled over your eyes in the wrong direction. How do you say that? You're like enticed or lured by something that's shiny but isn't true. It's a facade. Like,
Mm-hmm. Oh, so it's like because your Neptune is your way of feeling connected, and if you're not feeling connected because you're not doing your
that's right.
Neptune, and then you see somebody else who seems to be connected
Yeah,
or who seems to
yeah,
have a way to then you want to buy that or try their way, but if you're doing it your way and you already have that
yeah.
connection, then you aren't as
That's right.
drawn
That's
by
right.
what they're
Like,
selling.
like, um, somebody says, you look lost, and you're like, wow, I don't know, I'm going through grief and this is overwhelming. Why don't you come to this new spiritual retreat that I started? And you like somehow get enveloped into some like weird thing that maybe doesn't serve you, or an outright cult or something
Hmm.
damaging. But that sense of,
Hmm.
or we have all the answers, come worship with us, like stuff like that, you might get enticed. I'm not coming up with the right word. Lured, drawn, enticed, gravitate, because that thing part of you craves connection, and they're saying, we will help you connect to God, come. Whatever.
It's a
It's a
seeking. You're
seeking.
seeking to fill something that isn't being that you don't have your own innate sense of that because the
That's
Neptune
right.
is your innate sense of that connection. And so if you're not centered in that
Hmm.
and nourishing that, then it will try and that space will try and be filled by things that
That's right.
ultimately won't be. Nothing can be a replacement for our own connection to our own. We
Yes,
all have our own connection to that, but if you're not feeling that and using that, then you might plug pieces
that's
into it
right.
that don't really fit
That's right.
you.
That's right. I don't want to shame anybody who has explored alternate belief systems or been lured into things like this. I don't want to shame that, but there's that craving. There can be a craving when our Neptunes are not met. And again, creating a vacuum, and then we might draw certain opportunities to us that maybe in the long run don't serve us, but maybe are good learning journeys along the way. Maybe I get involved in this group, and 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 months in, I'm like, or 5 years in, I'm like, it doesn't feel true for me. It doesn't feel right. Well, that might be my Neptune maturing within a particular kind of scenario that I eventually leave. So I don't want to shame anybody, for that. But I remember there's one little anecdote I want to tell you, which is I had a client some years ago with Neptune in the house of groups, the 11th house, and she was talking about she was taking my energy as many as energy course, and we were talking about manifestation principles, and she was like, yeah, I keep finding myself drawn into these groups where they're telling us if you don't make $1 million a year, you're not succeeding. And I was like, okay, so that's a thing in the collective about money must equal success. And so I was like, you get to now decide to be discerning in a different way, or to chuck that teaching and redefine success for yourself. I mean, she's gotten kind of drawn into such groups. It goes well, and then she's like, wait a minute, this again? That's not right. Like, because it's a way that those teachers have of setting your mind up so you're giving them more money because they're making the $1 million a year by telling people you're
Hmm.
supposed to be making $1 million a year. I'm going to teach you, give me the money. So it's anyway. So I was trying, but she was really clear that doesn't feel right to me, and I was like, good, you're on the right track. You're sensing that dissonance, and that's a good way to say it.
Mm.
Harmony versus dissonance. This feels
Mm.
true to me. It doesn't feel true to me, and
I'm really glad we kind of unboxed
good.
that part of Neptune a little bit. And, I think that also illuminates, like, I keep thinking of the whole old trope of the guy who with the wagon who comes into town and selling
Yeah.
snake oil or something, right? And why do people buy snake oil
Mm-hmm.
or vibrating burn off the calorie
Yeah.
belts or
Right. Right.
whatever else, like on late night TV? Because if a person is feeling integrated and connected with
Mm-hmm.
with like all with nature and with a sense of their
Yeah.
eternity and like well-being, and is and then that's helping them be integrated and healthy, and they have that wellspring in
Right.
themselves of that connection. They're probably not looking to buy what someone is
Right.
selling to try and plug the
Right.
hole.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean if we have a sense of connection that we don't ever have those leakages. That's what I mean. Like, let's not shame ourselves if we believe something that turned out not to be true. But that sense of we have a craving for that kind of connection that can actually sweep us in. We can lose our footing in something that sounds good. The facade, the glamour, the old timey use of the word glamour, which is seeing something that's not real. The projection. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a practice of staying connected to it, and yeah, like you say, not judging if it's totally okay. Well, great. Let's talk about how Neptune comes up in transits too, then, and I guess we'll start there. Just like so, that's Neptune in the birth chart. What is Neptune like when it transits the birth chart?
So as a teacher, it's asking you all the way around the wheel, but the orbit is a 164-year orbit. Is that true? Did I do that right? Anyway, it's around there.
Something like that.
So it's asking. I'm sure people listening are like, why don't they know the numbers? It's because whatever. We're both Mercury and Neptune. We got stuff to say. Come on, stop trying to quote numbers. You can look it up. Anyway.
Yeah, it's Google. We're not astrologers in 1700.
Yeah, exactly. So it asks, is it true? Like Byron Katie's work, over and over again. Is this thing you're doing serving your highest good? Or is this thing flowing or not flowing? Are you doing something that doesn't serve you or doesn't fit your truth? Or are you and this is a big question here, the big one. Are you surrendered to something that doesn't serve you? Or do you need to upgrade that? Do you need to stop this, plug that leak, refigure out a new thing, or figure out a new way to feel connected? Like, let's say that for real, legit, let's say that the first 8 times I used cannabis, I felt unbelievably connected and everything was the best ever. Like, I was like, and it wasn't using it every day. It was just like, but when I did, it was amazing. And then the 9th time, I was like, I don't know, I just don't like how I feel. Well, okay. Let's say on my day off, I always watch Netflix, like binging to zone out. Well, let's say that works for 6 or 7 days over a 3-month period. Let's say the 8th time, I'm like, nah, it doesn't feel right. Or I always go to this particular park. It's so peaceful. I always unwind. I de-stress. I wave at people's dogs. I say hi to people. Whatever. Well, let's say the 10th time I go there, it doesn't do anything for me. Upgrading, evolving, figuring out new ways of feeling connected. Yeah. Or what if the best... Sorry, I just have several of these in my head. What if the best thing ever were the first 5 James Taylor concerts I went to? Great. Well, now, suddenly this other thing happened, and I saw this video, and I was like, I have to go see them. Completely different. Right? Completely different style, energy, vibe, aesthetic. Everything's different. So, does it serve you? That involves, is it healthy? Does it help you find peace? When you give into it, does it suck your energy or does it feed you energy? Anyway, lots of different questions in there, but Neptune in transit says, what are you surrendered to? Is it right? Or what are you not surrendering to that you know you need to, but you keep resisting? Those kinds of things. I know I just gave you a lot, but...
No, it's good. And it can change and evolve over time. It's gonna bug me if I don't. So I'm gonna say that, like, clean up my joke from 2 minutes ago and say that it's totally valid to know.
Yeah, it totally is. Of course, it is.
As well, and we know some of the numbers.
Sure.
But we also have Mercury, Neptune, and we're just vibing with it in a different way. But yeah. So the transiting Neptune I like the way you were painting how it can, because Neptune moves in transit slowly, but it is transiting the birth chart, and we're evolving over time too. So thinking of it as this teacher that can walk us through, you know, for this span of time, this is helping the person get closer to it, and now maybe taking this other step, and now this other step, and it's like spiraling kind of towards more and more like evolution of that sense of connection over time. It's not going to just be going back to the same well forever for our whole lives, but one needs to dance with the divine, and with inspiration, and with creativity, and
Yes.
with alignment and connection, and be open to hearing and feeling, sensing, like you say, like where is the juice now, you know?
And another way to think about it is, where do I derive a sense of meaningfulness? It's another angle on it too, just in line with what you said.
What's true for me now? What
Yeah.
serves me
Yeah.
now? Right? And no judgment. Like I mean, there's been spans of time, like I can see these chapters in my life of, you know, and it's not that, that was a waste of time, and that was just like lost in a game, and
Yeah.
that was like, you know, ungrounded. But it's like, that served me then, and that served me then, and that served me then, and now what serves me now? Neptune might ask those kinds of
Yeah.
questions.
Wanting you, it always wants you to learn about yourself by exploring being part of something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say that my thing is the orchestral music, but then somebody says, would you like to come to this kirtan, like chanting thing? And I go there and I'm like, whoa, this is exactly the same. It's the best. You know, to find the commonalities among beings, among consciousness, to, you know, experience ourselves as part of whatever it is. And so, you know, I don't know if, you know, a professional basketball game would do the same for me as Sibelius Symphonies, but it could. I mean, I don't know if being around a bunch of people in a Catholic church who have the intent of prayer, the love for God in their hearts, and they're praying, I don't know if that wouldn't make me feel blissful too. So it's like, I would say it's important to let ourselves, not force it, but to let ourselves explore different ways of feeling connected to something bigger or higher truth.
Not forcing, but open. Like, this is the surrender element of Neptune, and also the getting out of the mind of, like, you know, my mind has what it thinks, what it knows, and what it thinks, and its designs. But, like, you know, what beyond what I know could be meaningful to me.
And then another groove is Neptune in transit might present something bigger than you. And the way I want to say this is, Neptune might be activating a planet in your chart by transit. Different aspects, different explanations. But it might be stopping what you're doing, so to speak, or erecting barriers because something about the thought process or the motivation or the methods maybe isn't aligned with a higher truth for you. Maybe don't serve you. And a lot of times I think about this. If you're blocked, check in with what your motivation has been. Because Neptune wants you to align with a higher truth. And if, like for me, I don't know, if I play in a workshop and it's from my brain, right, it may not get off the ground sometimes. But if I take Neptune's teaching, well, maybe my motivation for offering that workshop, maybe it's not really a good motivation. Maybe it's not a healthy motivation. So I need to see a higher perspective, a higher truth, a different perspective on that. And for that reason, Neptune transits, I think, can ask us to step outside ourselves a little bit, outside of our linear logical minds, to take a stab at a 10,000 or 20,000 foot view. Ideally with some objectivity, but what's my motivation? Why am I, to find out why the flow isn't occurring or what is stuck. And I've had that before. I've told you about the Lilith intensive. I had this idea for a small group. I'd done 6 other kinds of intensives, maybe 5 at that point, with a 6th a couple weeks later. But anyway, at this point, one point, and nobody signed up, and people had asked me to do it, and it had been on my mind for years. 6 people traveled to where I lived for 4 days, intense energy work, transformation, all Lilith stuff. And I said to my guides for weeks, can you help me understand what the block is? And this guide of mine finally came through and said, do you really, I'm going to be blunt, do you really want to hold space for and process and be with 6 people's rape stories? And my response was, but I'm really good at it. And we went on a little bit, and then he finally said, why do you want this? And unconsciously out of me, like a Neptune Freudian slip, I said, oh, because of past life stuff about sexuality and patriarchal imbalance, I'm trying to prove to the goddess that I'm worth love. And I was like, what? Who said that? And it's this thing, the truth came out of me. And the guide said, it's not healthy for you. So the higher truth was not Tom's good at it, but the higher truth was it's not good for him. And so he said, make a home study course instead, and that's what I did. He said, do it. They have their own timeline. You're not in a room doing that processing. And I was like, okay. And he's like, can you let the thing go about the goddess? Can you let it go? And I was like, yeah. He said, great. So the higher truth sometimes stands in our way of what we're trying to do. We may feel frustrated, but let's endeavor, especially Neptune in transit, endeavor to see 10,000 foot view. Okay, what is going on here? What's the motivation? What's the energy involved? That's one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can help us see the truth. It can help, spiritualize an area of life. It can help us get more like on track with truth and inspiration and alignment in different areas. Mm-hmm. And I like what you're saying about the if I'm mirroring that back in a clear way, and I like what you're saying about the it can give us a chance to get some like distance to see more clearly, or from a higher point of view, because that circles us back to the conversation about it in the birth chart, and how, whether you meditate or you go to the boxing gym or you go for a bike ride or you take a walk in nature or you paint or cook or whatever, the point of these Neptunian aligned experiences is to get that. Why do people meditate? Why do people work out? Bodies also, but like to get some space from something and come at it more clearly, or to see it from these other, to integrate it with the holistic picture. And so Neptune wants us to be able to do that in the areas of life that it transits through.
And sometimes our egos are attached to things. Our personalities are attached, and that's, I have another anecdote actually from a friend of mine. Some years ago, he was, I can't remember if it was Neptune to his Sun or his Mercury, but it was to something. It could have been to his Mars. But anyway, he was a graduate student in trumpet performance. And he had to start over with his embouchure. And the embouchure is how you hold your lips to the thing. And so basically, at this point, he's in his mid-20s, and he's been doing the same thing since he was like 9 years old or something. He had to, in graduate school, change, which is major. And then he had to do it again. And so for his ego, not using ego as a bad word or criticizing him for having ego, but his sense of self was a graduate music student headed toward a doctorate in music. Anyway, this setback, right? And even as we're talking, and you saying what you were saying, I realized, this was got to be like 2005 or something. I realized, the bird's eye view on that is, because he was going to teach a bunch of different people, and it would make him a better teacher to understand as an adult how to redo it. But anyway, that's the Neptune message for him. I get it 18 years later or whatever, 17 years later. But there's always a bird's eye view when something seems to be going wrong or there's a barrier. And Neptune tries to get us to expand our view, which can be difficult for the personality.
It can feel threatening or scary or unwanted to the part of us that has a way of doing things or is
That's it.
attached to identification or to its ideas of how something's going to go. But Neptune, and it's not about making that. I mean, there's a teacher I quite like who says that the ego's job is to focus us in physical reality, just like a scuba mask's job is to let you see underwater, right? And we want an ego, but letting it be aligned with and informed by guidance and the direction and the help of the higher self, of the bird's eye view from Neptune coming in and helping it past its own blind spots into something that's more in its highest good.
And the co-creation idea is one tool to think about. Basically, Neptune's saying, what, as far as you've gotten with your own brain and your personality, maybe there's some limitations. Let me point them out to you. If you can work with the universe or see that you're collaborating with things that are bigger than you, bigger forces are at play. There's one way to think of it. And so you may have personal things that get slowed down until you understand you're co-creating. I mean,
and this is where it connects into nature and stuff too, of like, oh, I'm part of a planet, and like, so let me change my consumption patterns or something, or all these layers of being part of something bigger than us. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, to wrap up the transit thing, I think my brain's getting tired. I wanted to signal that to you. To wrap up the transit bit, it's asking you, but we also get in Mercury, Neptune, and keep going, and I just want to make sure we don't devolve into like Neanderthals or something, some previous version. But anyway, to some other kind of bipedal hominid that's not capable of doing podcasts. But anyway, are you surrendered to a truth, or are you surrendered to something that doesn't work for you? Or are you not surrendered to something that could work for you? So there's all those questions there. Is it true? Are you surrendered? What are you not surrendering to? Meaning, what are you trying to control? What are you fighting? What are you resisting? A lot of stuff like that with the Neptune transits. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's appropriate for us to get a little lost in the Neptune conversation. I'd wanted to say, exactly. We're probably on the same thought. So let me frame it up because this is the one thing we haven't touched on with Neptune yet. And it's the idea that, a lot of people ascribe to it this quality of it being confusing or foggy and having that quality. And I think I'm already preempting it a little because we just had this conversation about the ego. And so like, there's like, what is Neptune confusing to? Well, it's confusing to our patterning and our attachments and stuff. But anyhow, let me pass it over to you and say, like, what would you say to that discussion of why does Neptune feel fuzzy and foggy and confusing to us?
And what I had wanted to say was, a lot of people are taught you can't really understand Neptune because it's foggy and confusing. And I wanted to say, I think that's a failure of imagination, because when we look at it, we get confused. But you and I are both Neptunian people, so I think we're great people to have offered these explanations in case they are helpful. But anyway, what I would say to that is altered states. The linear logical mind, which is attached to personality and is a lot about ego, personal, the perception of our inner narrative or personal, perceptions of life and the story we're telling ourselves about who we are. But there's something bigger. There are different forces outside of us. Our brains are not the only game in town. So when we encounter Neptunian stuff, we may feel altered and therefore not able to control. You and I just keep talking, but a lot of people get disoriented and don't. We get disoriented and we keep going. But it's just who you are and who I am as individuals. But
good for the listeners.
Maybe sometimes.
Maybe.
But I hope so. But yeah, it's confusing. So some people will say, well, I mean, you just can't understand it, which means they haven't been taught a better explanation. Because living with Neptune, I do it all the time. I'm teaching people left and right. Get grounded, because your empathic, intuitive, sensitive to emotion parts of you are real as a human. And then some people are more empathic or more intuitive or more sensitive, whatever. But it's real, so get grounded so you can learn to manage it. And then again, that's what the Higher Self Protocol is. Teaching people to manage emotions and energies better so they're not controlling themselves. They're allowing themselves to work with forces that are greater than themselves. So I think it's that sense of I should be able to control things because my brain has appointed itself dictator for life, and I don't understand. Like if you go to a reader who's very Neptunian and is channeling or whatever, and they give you a tape of that reading, and you go home and you say to your family member or your friend, you're like, I don't know, it just didn't really do anything. And 4.5 years later, you find that tape and you listen to it, and you're like, oh my god, it was just 4 years too early. Like it makes total sense. It's weird. It's non. It's we say non-denominational with certain kind of belief structures, but like it's multi-dimensional in that way. And you might be getting two messages at once. You might be getting, so it's weird, and our brains can't control it. So therefore, we decide sometimes we can't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot here to start to wrap.
great.
Maybe if not wrapping one's mind around it, opening one's mind
Yeah,
to it.
yeah,
It's maybe an interesting way to I like
I
that
do
nuance
too. I
there.
do too. Because that's just it. We can't
So,
wrap around it, so we get frustrated. Yeah, exactly.
exactly. So I guess we'll leave off there for today, and we'll come back next time and talk about Pluto and the nodes. I want to say that by the time this episode is out, we are now probably up and running with a Patreon. So I'll put some links in the description below, but if you want to find us on Patreon, Empowered Astrology, we're going to start doing monthly or bi-monthly forecasts, and there should also be a video up talking about the major transits of 2023. So if you like what we're doing and you'd like to tune into some additional content, you're welcome to check us out there, and there'll be links to websites and stuff in the description as well. And yeah, thank you for tuning in and exploring all of
Thank
this with
you.
us.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Peace. See you later.